Okay, I think we should get started. I'm excited for today's webinar, and I know you are too. Thanks again for joining. Just to refresh, this is Groundswell's Energy Futures series. And in our Energy Futures, which are monthly series where we explore topics relevant to bringing better and faster services to all our neighbors, low, moderate income households, residential customers across the nation who would be better served with clean energy services, efficiency, and solar. So Energy Futures explore how we can all build that future together and include everybody. Today, we're welcoming two guests who are experts from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, who will be sharing both a report recently published on how evaluation can help you and your program improve the services you deliver, and also highlighting the resources and networks available to all of us through the National Community Solar Partnership sponsored by the Department of Energy. In both these cases, you're going to be pleased and surprised. I think we will delight you today. For housekeeping though, I want to make sure you understand if you're with us on this webinar, you are part of the webinar. This is for you and with you. So if you have any questions and comments at any time, please type that into the chat box in this Zoom webinar, and we will get to your questions as quickly as we can at the appropriate moment. We'll be having a conversation after our guests deliver their formal presentation concerning evaluation programs and low-income services for community solar and solar. Please feel free to enter chat, enter your comment, enter your question at any time, and we'll get to that in the Q&A toward the end of the webinar. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome specifically our two subject matter experts for today's webinar. We have with us today Greg Leventis from Lawrence Berkeley. Greg is he's well known to those of us in the solar field because Greg is very active in the National Community Solar Partnership as well as in performing the research service that he does through the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. He is a program manager in electricity markets and policy department with Lawrence Berkeley, and he conducts research and analysis for, I'm losing my, there we go, for Berkeley, as well as coordinating a very important service through the National Community Solar Partnership, the Technical Assistance Program. So his personal focus includes efficiency, finance, cost of saving energy, and incentive programs, designs, and analyses. And we welcome him today. He'll be speaking to those and those resources in just a minute. Following Greg, we welcome Ben Paulos, who serves as the principal of Paulos Analysis, total expert on consulting for energy policy, advocacy, communications, and research. Most importantly for today, Ben is the central author, the principal author of the report we'll be reviewing, and he'll be bringing the results of that report and suggestions from it, recommendations for you for program design and analysis based on evaluation. Ben is affiliated with Electricity Markets and Policy Group at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and we hope he's there for a long time, providing great service for all of us in the solar market and solar industry. And now, without further ado, let's bring up Greg. And Greg, please share with us some of your background in the way we can connect with the National Community Solar Partnership.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate that, Chris, and thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. I feel very lucky to be directly and indirectly involved in a lot of really exciting solar work. So one thing that I work with Chris on is I'm honored to be on the data science subcommittee of LIFT's Research Advisory Council. We have calls from time to time. I'm always excited to learn about the work that they're doing. It's definitely not easy work, but I think that it will be a really great contribution to our understanding of low-income participation in solar. And it's also just fun to work with Chris. I'm also really lucky to have some amazing colleagues who do great work at Berkeley Lab, like Ben Paulos, who in a minute is going to talk about a really valuable and important study on evaluation that he led with some of our colleagues at Berkeley Lab. which they published this spring. So Alicia, if you could put up the slides, I'll just start with, hold on one second. Yeah, so as we know, one avenue for low-income folks to be able to participate in solar is through community solar. And a major initiative that, as Chris mentioned, I've been directly involved with is the National Community Solar Partnership, where I serve as the Technical Assistance Coordinator. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about that now. So if you don't know it, the National Community Solar Partnership is an initiative with the following goals. Next slide, please, Alicia. So the first is making community solar accessible to every US household. And then the second is ensuring that community solar is affordable for every US household. And then finally, the last is enabling communities to realize the supplementary benefits and other value streams from community solar installations. So it's really important for the NCSP, as we call it, that low and moderate income households are able to participate in solar energy and are able to realize all the benefits of that solar. Let's see, next slide, please. So the three main program elements of the NCSP. The first is the network, and there are lots of events. There is an online community platform, and through that, partners can engage with Department of Energy staff, lab staff, and I think most importantly, each other. So the partners they've done things like they formed online communities that meet regularly. They oftentimes post news and resources about community solar. And then I've also seen, which I think is really cool, a lot of times they will crowdsource questions that they have about different aspects of community solar. The second element is the collaboratives. And as you see here, these are structured groups that are formed around specific goals to address common barriers. So currently we have collaboratives that are focused on community solar issues that face municipal utilities, and also that are facing folks who are in the multifamily affordable housing area. And then finally, there is the technical assistance. So as I mentioned, I coordinate the technical assistance for NCSP, and NCSP offers partners free technical assistance in a wide range of subject matter areas. So policy, legislation, regulation, analysis, and development. Financing, that includes everything from cost benefit analysis to subscription structures, stakeholder outreach, like to government officials, utilities, and low-income communities, program design, and then finally, technical issues like solar modeling or integrating solar with other technologies. The technical assistance is provided by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and also third-party subject matter experts. Now, again, as I said, it is free, but you do have to be a partner. Next slide, please, actually. So to become a partner, it's very easy. To become a partner, you go to the link here. And I believe that let's see, I could actually put this in the chat, perhaps. No, it's not copying. The last thing I will say is that we are now taking applications on a rolling basis, which we're excited about. We're going to more formally announce this soon, but this means that partners will now be able to apply anytime. So like I say, we're very excited about that. And then one last thing I'd like to mention is that on the community platform and in other places, there are also resources that are available, which I think are very valuable. Next slide, please. This is an example of the types of stuff that you can find. This is a graph that NREL developed, and it's from an NCSP webinar earlier this year, and I thought it was very fitting for the topic of today's webinar. So as you can see on the y-axis here is capacity with different states on the x-axis. The blue shows the currently installed capacity for low and moderate income households, and then the orange shows planned capacity, and you can see that it's growing significantly. So I think this is a good illustration of the considerable growth that we can expect in community solar programs for low and moderate income folks. And that means that evaluations of these programs are going to be even more important and relevant in the future. I think you can see that right here. So with that, I will hand it back to Chris to hand it off to Ben.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I want to emphasize that Groundswell is particularly interested in the technical assistance through the National Community Solar Partnership on a separate vein. Groundswell, as you all may know if you're on the webinar, it's extremely active in helping frontline community groups, small grassroots advocacy groups in the renewable energy field, achieve justice and parity and equity in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion issues. So we are a proponent of the Justice 40 Accelerator. We realize that many frontline groups who really have good stuff to offer, vision for their community, and want to help shape a clean energy future don't have the capacity to access federal awards or even state awards or anything from a larger resource pool, because they just don't have the capacity to spend the money and the time applying and then managing these awards. So if you become a partner, which is free, with the National Community Solar Partnership, then you can apply through the partnership at any time to get technical assistance to help you apply for these very important and sustaining awards to get the work you want done accomplished in your community for your neighbors and yourselves. So very important, giving a big plug out to the National Community Solar Partnership and to Greg and his work with technical assistance. And I've helped a lot of groups access that and apply for it. So I hope you do too. If you're on this webinar or you see this webinar at some point, do check out National Community Solar Partnership. You are working on something for your community, look for technical assistance. And of course, come back to Groundswell and me and our colleagues here, and we will further assist you as well.
And now in the chat, there is the link is in the chat. Thanks.
Yes.
Alicia
Yes.
and Annabelle are mine.
Thank you. So yes, so Alicia was able to put that in there. Please go to the chat and copy that, paste it, check it out. And now let's move on to the heart of the webinar today. And I'm sorry to put in that little promo, where Ben Paulus is going to share, as the principal author of Lawrence Berkeley Lab's recent report on evaluation, how you can use evaluation processes to improve your programming, to ensure you're reaching the people you intend to serve, and to serve them more completely and better. So Ben, please take it away, and thank you so much for sharing this with our webinar today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to see that the work is of use, and we can, and thanks for helping us get it out there. Yeah, so, and I think we can start the slides whenever you're ready. So this is this report was done at the request of the Department of Energy's Solar Office, where we assess not how these programs are doing, but how they're being evaluated. So next, and I worked on it with a number of colleagues at the lab. As I said, it's about how the programs are being evaluated. How do the evaluations align with the goals of the program? Are they collecting the right data? Also, what makes for good evaluation, and how can we make evaluations better? So to figure that out, we evaluated evaluations, a meta evaluation. We read about 32 reports from various programs. We interviewed 10 program administrators and evaluators. And then we used my colleagues used some statistical methods to test different ways to do low cost evaluation. Next. So we're going to talk about these 5 topics. First, a very brief landscape of low-income solar programs. You're probably mostly familiar with that. Then we're going to talk about the evaluation process and how it's being applied. And then we're going to learn how these statistical methods to do cheap, quick, and reasonably good evaluations. All right, next. So for some quick background, solar is, as I call it, it's becoming a middle-class home improvement project. It's increasingly moving into, moderate or medium income households. Uptake by low income households, though, has been pretty modest. It's trending up, but pretty slowly. So there are a number of programs set up to help address that. We counted over 40 programs dedicated to low income solar. They date back about 15 years, but the number of programs has certainly been increasing in recent years. The largest programs in the past have been for on-site solar, but community solar is certainly very popular now and is likely to scale up to be larger. Next. In California's had the longest track record and the largest size of these programs, with over $1 billion spent on low-income solar. Much of that has been for on-site through the single-family, multifamily programs. California has delivered for the single-family program, almost 10,000 homes have rooftop solar. However, there's a long way to go. California is a very large state. There are over 5 million households eligible for the program. So there's certainly no end of opportunity for bringing the benefits of solar to low-income households. Next. So here are a couple of examples. SASH I just mentioned. New York has a similar program, the New York Sun Affordable Solar Incentive. That's part of the larger NY Sun program. There are a number of multifamily programs as well. SOMA is the relatively new one in California. It's also by far the largest. It has funding of $100 million a year currently, and potentially $1 billion over 10 years. And they're shooting for 300 megawatts on multifamily apartments, apartment housing, with the benefits delivered on the bills of the customers. Then the report has the whole compendium of all the programs that we uncovered. All right, next. And then, of course, there are offsite programs or community solar programs. Community solar has a number of benefits over on-site. It's lower cost of energy. It's easier to scale up. It's easier to do a large project out in a field somewhere. And you can deliver, it's easier to reach tenants in multifamily housing through bill credits or virtual net metering. One drawback is that the customer usually doesn't get the benefit of owning the system as they would if they had their own rooftop system that they could own. And you're probably familiar with the many projects developing around the country. I think the New Jersey one is notable. The Community Solar Pilot has awarded potentially 75 megawatts of capacity for community solar. So that could be the biggest one. And their system is that the project has to have at least half of the subscribers be eligible low-income households. Next. All right, now I want to talk about the exciting part, how evaluations work. Next, please. Evaluations, or evaluation, measurement, and verification, EM&V, as it's known in the business, has been highly refined through the evaluating energy efficiency programs for many decades and very large amounts of money. So the EM&V process has very clear rules. It has standard research protocols. It has a history of best practices and a body of practitioners out there. And this is partly because, really mostly because, in order to recover the cost of the program, the utility has to prove that the program delivered benefits. So it's an investment grade analysis because there's a lot of money riding on the evaluation. The highly refined nature of it also means that there are uniform results across programs. So programs can be compared to each other in an apples to apples way. You can see how trends happen over time. There are metrics that have been developed, like the cost of saved energy, the cost of saved peak demand, which can be directly compared with the cost of generation. So evaluation is where all that comes from. Next. That's the theory, however. Then there's the practice of evaluation, especially in the realm of solar programs, which tend to be much smaller and not as, there's not as much cost recovery riding on them usually. So how evaluation happens in the real world is that there is a range of effort, from simple to very complicated. Very simple things like progress tracking, verifying that the rebates are going out the door, that they're going to the right people. As you get more complicated, you can see that there are, you can start tracking the impacts, the cost effectiveness or the cost and benefits of the program. And if you really want to go all out, you can see how, what impact you're having on the market that you're trying to affect. You know, if you're trying to affect solar installers delivering services to low-income households, then that would be a market impact, and you want to see how marketing behavior changes. The amount of work done really depends on the size of the program, the budget for the evaluation, what the future plans are, or if it's required by regulators or in statute. Next. The program goals, the goals of the program usually dictate what metrics are needed and how the evaluation is done. So if your program goal is somewhat broad, like solar for all, the metrics needed to prove whether you're delivering solar for all tend to be fairly general. The number of incentives or installations, are you reaching the right households? To do that evaluation, you simply tally up the process outputs, the incentives or the installations, and see who they're going to. If your program goals are more specific, like to cost effectively reduce poverty, then the metrics have to be more detailed. You need to know utility bills, the household income. You need to know the performance of the solar system you're installing, whether it's impacting home value or home finances. So to do that evaluation, you really need to know much more detailed information about the customer, about their spending, about their wealth or lack of it, how much it costs to deliver the program, and so on. Next. There are a number of evaluation questions that need to be answered in a good evaluation. First of all, who do you want to measure the benefits for? Are you measuring it from the perspective of the participant, the administrator of the program, or the ratepayers who are paying for it all, or society as a whole? How you measure cost effectiveness really can dictate the outcome of your research. In general, I'll flag it though, low-income energy programs, or really low-income programs of any kind, are usually not cost effective, largely because the program participant doesn't share the cost. With regular solar, a tax incentive, we give a 25% tax incentive and the customer pays the other 75%. With low-income programs, the customer is not in a position to share the cost. And the whole point of the program is to reduce their cost of living or improve the quality of life. So the cost effectiveness usually has a much lower bar. And also, non-energy impacts are extremely important. We're not really doing these programs simply to save energy or produce energy. We're doing it to benefit the customer, to benefit the low-income household. So we tend to have a lot of non-energy goals that don't usually fit or don't fit comfortably in the energy framework. Next. Evaluation can also be used for continuous improvement, doing the evaluation as you go and feeding those results back into the planning or the design or the implementation of the program can be a way to improve the quality of the program as you do it. So it doesn't have to be simply a report card at the end of the program, but as a way, it can be a way to improve the program as you do it. Next. So that's a quick roundup of, some highlights of evaluation thinking. We're now going to look at a few case studies from low-income solar programs and highlight some that we thought were notable. Next. So for an example of that the full Monty gold standard evaluation, you really have to look at these very large programs in California, the SASH and MASH programs, the single family and multifamily programs. Those programs have been running for a long time. They have large budgets, and therefore they have large evaluation budgets. They include all of the best practices taken from the world of energy efficiency evaluation. So they do, they look at market impacts, they do quality assurance for the data, make sure it's accurate, and they look at non-energy benefits. So if you want to see, how it really ought to be done, those are the ones to look at. However, most programs are not that big and they don't have that kind of budget to do that analysis. So one interesting way to do a low-cost analysis, which we're going to talk about in a bit, really has been tried out already in Connecticut with the Green Bank. They have done they've done internal evaluations done by their own staff, not consultants, so it helps save some money. And it combines their own program data, like the addresses of the program participants. They combine that with publicly available census data to get some idea of who they're reaching and whether they're reaching the right audiences. The third example is from Hawaii, the Green Energy Money Saver program. That's a rooftop solar program, finance program. Because it's a finance program, they have to collect a lot of data on household income and credit scores and things like that. They combine that data with, they calculate energy savings and fuel savings and the new tax revenues from the employment and the property tax, I guess. So they really, it's a very small operation, but they have a very rich data set that they collect and provide a lot of good insight. Next. One good example of planning ahead is in Illinois. The Solar for All program, the evaluation was planned and scheduled and funded in the law that enacted the program. So they even did an evaluation on the startup of the program, and they have evaluations planned throughout. One at the other end of the spectrum is the Mass Solar Loan Program. That's a program that has actually phased out, and it was encouraging. The point of the program was to encourage banks to give loans for low-income households to put solar on the roof. And as the program wound down, they wanted to encourage banks to continue doing that, even though the state program was going to be going away. So they collected and analyzed very detailed performance data on their loans, and they shared it with the banks to help them understand, failure rates and so on, to help encourage them to keep doing that lending. And one last highlight, there are at least 3 programs we found that do more or less real-time online tracking of their progress, number of rebates, where the rebates are going, things like that, where the installations are happening. That's a really good idea because it helps with continuous improvement. It keeps all the stakeholders informed about what's happening, and it helps vendors plan ahead to know where they should go or how long the rebates are going to be available, et cetera. Next. There's one example of the how the cost benefit tests work and the non-energy benefits. The SASH program evaluation in California looked at non-energy benefits from all different perspectives, the participant test, the society test, et cetera. They found that the non-energy benefits add about 25% to the benefit calculation, which is good. Very interesting thing I thought was that the biggest non-energy benefit was that California and many states and many utilities have programs for low-income customers to subsidize their bills or to give them a rate discount to reduce the cost of their energy bill. Putting solar on those homes reduces the need to subsidize their bill. So that was actually the largest non-energy benefit, was the savings the customers in the bill assistance programs that other ratepayers pay. So solar actually saves money for everyone, not just for the customer who gets it. Next. There we go. Okay. All right. So this is the section that my colleague Eric O'Shaughnessy was the lead on. He wanted to evaluate how, looking at that Connecticut evaluation and the problem that a lot of these programs are small, we were thinking, how can we do an evaluation using publicly available free data to reduce the cost of evaluation? So we looked at two different approaches, a household level approach specific to the customer and a location-based approach. With a household approach, you need to collect information from that household. You need to get to get them to tell you their income and their demographics and so on. That can definitely give you more power and precision in your evaluation. However, it can be difficult to collect all of that data. It takes time and effort. Customers aren't always willing to give it to you, and it may be an impediment to their participation in the first place. Using location-based approach, you really need their address, and you combine that with census data and other data to make assumptions about that household. It's not as accurate for sure, but it's much easier to implement with available data. Next. So the three steps are to collect the data, to aggregate it, and then to evaluate it. The aggregation is basically where you bring together the program data along with the publicly available data and overlay them. Next. And you get results. Eric found results like this doing this analysis with large data sets. He used data from California, Connecticut, and New York, where the data was available, and found using household level data that programs were in fact reaching the intended recipients, low-income households. On the left here, you see the zero line is median income, or the eligibility line, I should say, for the programs. And the income, the recipients in the yellow boxes are right around where you would expect them to be. People who were not receiving the low income incentives had much higher incomes. So it was a very basic check. Are we reaching the right people? The answer was yes, using household level data. Then he did the same approach on the right here with this bar that used zip codes for income data from the zip code of the recipient. So not the household itself, but the household zip code. So we were able to look at their neighborhood and say, well, this is the median income for the neighborhood. And we've basically found the same thing, that the recipients did in fact live in low income neighborhoods. So we were the program was reaching the right audience. Next, please. So really that approach hinges on one important fact, which is that our neighborhoods tend to be segregated by income. People live in neighborhoods at income levels in the same ballpark. So because of that, using a geographic approach can be a reasonably good approximation for the income of the household. And of course, as I said, the report has a lot more information about how to do that approach. And it can be a good way to test whether a program is on the right track. Next, please. Okay, and actually we're gonna wrap it up with some findings and recommendations, and then have some time left for Q&A, I'm hoping. Next. So some of the findings from the report, we looked at over 40 programs, but only about a third of them actually had publicly available evaluation documents. That's partly because many of these programs are new. They haven't really been evaluated yet. Some of them are fairly small, so they may not really be evaluated. They certainly face budget constraints from their relatively small size. And in some cases, a low-income program is part of a larger solar program, and they're not really being evaluated separately. The second finding was that even though we found a lot of progress reports, number of rebates given, et cetera, we didn't really find many true program evaluations. Really, only about 4 of the programs have done what we considered, in-depth evaluations. And that's probably, again, because of the size of most programs. Third finding is that the evaluations, because most of them do progress reports, they pretty much all report progress metrics, like the number of installations, number of customers participating. Some go the next step and calculate or collect information on the bill reduction or the energy output of the system. Some even look at the number of jobs created. So there is as I mentioned before, a spectrum of evaluation. Next. And some of the best practices, I thought I'd recap some that I mentioned already, since it's useful. Doing continuous evaluation can be helpful in feeding back into the program and improving it as you go. That requires you to plan ahead. It requires you to have a system in place before you start for how you're going to collect the data, how it's going to be evaluated, and how it's going to be fed back in. This is especially important for new programs. The DC Solar for All program, for example, is doing a phase of experimentation and evaluation, essentially, where they're trying different approaches and they're feeding that back into their future plans. Another good practice is to draw from other fields, especially, as I mentioned, the field of energy efficiency. Tying into low-income efficiency programs can also be useful because you can use those larger programs to identify customers and to deliver your solar program. So it makes a lot of sense to piggyback on the long track record of energy efficiency programs. The third good practice is to, as I mentioned, to use your own program data and augment it with outside data. Next. And if possible, you should really work towards standardizing your evaluation. That makes it easier to see how you're doing over time, to compare with other programs, and also to implement the evaluation if you know exactly what it is you want to do. That can lower the cost of evaluation. Integrating non-energy benefits, I think, is very important because the motivation for these programs, frankly, is to deliver non-energy benefits. So I think making sure you track those indicators of wealth, health, and safety is very important. And lastly, I didn't really talk about the difference between impact evaluations and process evaluations. Impact evaluations tends to be the sort of bottom line metric, how did we do? But the process evaluation can actually tell you a lot more about how you're doing and what needs to be improved. So we have the report is available at our website, emp.lbl.gov. We have a kind of a home of where we've collected some of our work on solar demographics at solardemographics.lbl.gov. We have interactive data tools which go down to the county level, and we have a tracking report that we're planning to do every year. So please visit that and let me know if you have any questions or want to get in touch with us for further research. I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, we do. And we had one in the chat already from Art O'Donnell, who was asking you, Ben, specifically, well, I can just read it, but basically it's like the evaluations you were able to review, the meta review, seems to deal with solar, perhaps, but possibly different from LMI. Ben, Arthur's question is, are there any evaluations specific to community solar programs? I'm finding that what is important to document for community solar, i.e. meeting carve-outs, migration of subscribers, long-term project viability, and et cetera, may be different from general LMI programs. And he asked that you respond to that.
Yeah, I think most of the program evaluations we found were for on-site solar programs. They tend to have a longer track record and therefore have more ability to have been evaluated. Newer programs, there's always a time lag. You can't really evaluate the program until you run the program for a while. So, and most community solar programs are relatively recent. So yeah, I think, and plus we also limited our work to low-income programs. That was our assignment. And I don't know, I guess the longest running community solar programs would be in Minnesota, I think.
Yeah.
And they have not really used them for low-income households so much in Minnesota. So I know they've been talking about it, but I'm not sure that that's actually been implemented.
Yeah, the Minnesota state legislation around community solar was the earliest in the United States, but it was also begun in a period of great hope and foment. And I think the programs created for community solar there didn't specifically, they were intended to serve low-income households and all residential households, but the way the law was written, it was open to interpretation, and the utilities in Minnesota have primarily used it for commercial subscribers. So several big commercial subscribers and very little volume in the residential market. Now that has changed recently, but in the early years of the Minnesota program, that was true, and to the sorrow of all the advocates there, but they've been working hard since it was enacted to correct that on behalf of their citizens. Let me circle back, and thank you, Arthur, for that question. Please, reminding folks on the webinar, put your questions in the chat. We may open it up to conversation as well and unmute people depending on the conversation and what we want to go over, but please enter any questions and comments in the chat and we will address them as we go. I had myself a question you were just able to touch on at the very end of your presentation, Ben, the difference in evaluations themselves between an impact evaluation and a process. And you spoke to this for real quick, but I wanted to go back to that and say, because so many low-income community solar programs are fairly young, it seems that process is the way to go. A process evaluation is the way to go. And can that be done, as you said, in a relatively inexpensive way that delivers some validation, some direction, some ability to revise and improve a program while it's still in operation for the benefit of the low-income neighbors we wish to serve?
Yeah, well, I think, the techniques that we talked about using census data, that can tell you whether you're reaching the right people, which is a useful data point.
Always.
Some other questions are like with process evaluations, what is the experience like for the program participants? That's an important process question. Is it easy to participate? Is it difficult? Are you losing people who are eligible but who don't want to go through the hassle of whatever your process is? Sometimes that can be done with an outside advisor or consultant, but a lot of times it can be done really internally just by being aware of what's working, what isn't working as you go, and being willing to revamp your protocols as you do it. So it doesn't have to be an external, big budget operation. It really can be an internal process where you just keep an eye out on be critical of yourself, of what's working and what isn't.
I will say from the position of Groundswell, we are conducting right now research with programs that serve low-income subscribers, community solar programs. And then what we're finding is program administrators, whether they're utilities or developers or the municipality, whoever's running that program, they make assumptions that, well, we designed it to serve low-income people. We know we know we're serving them, but when Groundswell goes in and checks against Census Tract and just checks, we're like, well, actually you don't have that many low-income people here. And it may not be a question of the program design, it may be a question of the marketing, the communication about the, like eligibility is clear, whether the eligible household feels trusted, feels served, feels invited and welcomed is a very different matter. And so evaluation that assesses the target audience, the low-income family, are they aware of the program? Are they willing to participate, regardless of it's free or easy? Do they trust this program and the program provider?
Yep. Yeah, that was going back again to the SASH evaluations from California, which are so substantive. You know, there are 3 volumes, they're 600 pages or more.
A lot.
And
Yeah.
they did surveys. You know, the consultants would do surveys of program participants and non-participants and ask them, you know, why did you or why did you not participate? And then they were able to break that out by target audiences. So one thing they found, for example, was that Hispanic households in California, they tend to trust people they know. So word of mouth and, you know, community, talking to the community was really what sold them on the solar program. They tended to not trust advertising, salesmen, government. So working through trusted partners was found to be the best way to reach eligible households in the Hispanic community. So that's a really interesting process finding that had to be found, you know, later on through survey methods. But you know, it again underscores the importance of process evaluations, not just impact evaluations.
Exactly. Greg, I was wondering, in terms of the National Community Solar Partnership, membership there, TA provision through that, do you think this is also true in terms of, you know, the factors that inspire and facilitate families joining a low-income community solar program, possibly with free subsidy? I mean, would those same factors apply to it at an organizational level to potential partners among our frontline community organizations who might consider joining the National Community Solar Partnership? It's also free to join. It's easy to join. Do we see a lot of frontline community organizations joining it? I don't know. And maybe it's because of marketing or trust issues, not because of other types of challenges. So I just wanted your opinion.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I think that the marketing can definitely be helpful in that respect. I'm not sure. I know that there are some frontline communities for sure that are partners and that are active partners of the National Community Solar Partnership, but we have about 625 partners, and I'm not sure what the breakdown is in terms of frontline communities that are partners and others and non-frontline communities, but that is food for thought that I'll be
just
talking
a thought. I didn't mean to put you
now.
on the spot.
No,
Let's get back, but in the chat, we also have a question from Jenny Heater, and I think this is to you, Ben. Can you speak to the budget levels needed for different types of evaluation? And that was my question as well. I know, and everybody out there who does evaluations knows they can be very expensive activities. And the best ones are really expensive, which you said in your presentation. Of course, the big programs in California, because they're big and have big budgets, they can afford to do the gold standard types of evaluations. And you also mentioned in Eric O'Shaughnessy's piece how that could be less expensive and internal and so forth. Please speak to budget levels if you can, and what size organizations should consider this, you know?
I found a report, another colleague at the lab, Steve Scheller, who is sort of the guru of evaluations of the EM&V world. He did a report for DOE. It's a bit old, but he found that in 2011, he tallied up evaluation budgets. He found $5 billion worth of energy efficiency programs, and they had an evaluation expenditure of $186 million. So about 3.5% of the total program budgets was spent on evaluation. And those are, as I said, those are like financial grade evaluations, very high quality. And of course, bigger programs might have a smaller percentage of evaluation because, you know, you don't need as much. But so the SASH program evaluation for 2011 to 2013, which I think was done in 2015, that looked at a budget, a program. It had a program budget of about $100 million, and they spent about $1 million on the evaluation. So that's about a 1% evaluation budget to do a very high quality analysis. And $1 million budget is, you can do a lot with that.
Yeah, you can.
You know, when you have much smaller programs, you know, the percentage might be higher, especially I think if it's an experimental program, like the DC programs I mentioned, Washington, DC, they're explicitly doing experiments and then evaluating them. So I imagine the evaluation budget is probably bigger than if you know exactly what you want to do and plan to keep doing it. So, you know, the thing about low-income solar has really struck me is that I don't think anyone knows the right answer for how to reach low-income households. There are lots of barriers to having to reaching them with really any kind of program, but especially with solar, which is still sort of new and unfamiliar. It's logistically a bit more difficult to, you know, put something up on the roof that's going to last for 30 years. So, you know, I think people are really still trying to figure out the best approach, the approach that's cost effective, that is logistically feasible, that is marketable, and that's scalable. You know, and I think there's a lot of experimentation happening, and maybe that's why there's as much interest in evaluation as there is, because people want to know how the experiments are going.
Absolutely.
And what the approach is.
Follow up
Just,
to that. Oh, I'm sorry, Greg.
Oh, I was just going to say one thought that I have on that is working through or reaching out to community action agencies for a number of reasons. One, they're oftentimes a trusted partner, and two, they're oftentimes, because they often run multiple programs for low-income folks. Low-income folks might be there for other reasons, and so they could be a touch point. They're also mission-driven, so they will be. I think they'll oftentimes understand low-income needs and limitations, and have their best interests in mind. So
Absolutely. I will say Groundswell does that in the markets in which we have solar development, and of course we are developing intentionally to serve low-income households in the markets where we work. And we do partner with those local community action agencies, community action programs, because they are there in the community. If we're working in, say, Georgia or New York or wherever, Vermont, wherever we are, we don't live there, but we want to make sure we walk beside, journey beside the families we intend to serve. I had a quick question, because we're almost at the end of our time. For you, Ben, what is an optimal timing for evaluation? I mean, no matter what size your program is, when should you consider conducting an evaluation of that program?
Well, I think, you know, the progress tracking starts from day zero. But really, you know, a more substantive evaluation probably depends on whether you, you know, whether it's, the timing can depend on what, like whether it's experimental or not. If it's a pilot program, you need to evaluate quickly because you might be doing something with it. If it's, if it also may depend on whether the program is up for renewal.
Yeah.
You need to prove that it's worth continuing, or that it's an opportunity to reform it and to change elements of it. That's when it's a good time to evaluate. So sometimes the timing of evaluation is imposed on you from outside.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's something you do all the time because you want to be better at what you're doing. So
It's a combination, I would guess, of do I
Yeah.
have to do it and do I have the money to do it? And
Right.
am I motivated to evaluate because I know my program could be better and I want it to be better, and I just need to find the resources and the capacity to
Right.
engage in some level of evaluation that would get me where I need to go.
Mhm.
And did you see it off the top of your head a breakdown between how many folks, or maybe there's a blurry line between how many of these programs were doing the evaluations because of regulatory requirements that they had to meet versus ones that were trying to improve the program?
Some were absolutely required to do it, especially the larger ones. I'd say some of the smaller ones that weren't required to do evaluations, they tended to just have sort of a feeling about how it was going. The administrator, the program manager just thought it's going well or it isn't going well, or it was much more informal, much more casual. And that one, in those cases, it really did hinge, and probably across the board with all of them, it really did hinge on what your program goals were. If your goals were really serious and substantive, you probably needed a more serious and substantive evaluation. If your goal was, well, the city council just gave me $1 million to spend on low-income solar, so I better make sure it gets out to low-income neighborhoods, so the city council will be happy. That's a very different dynamic, but probably part of the question in some of these, or part of the calculation in some of these programs is that are the proponents of it happy with how it's going?
Yeah, thanks.
Well, and thank you both. And thank you to the participants in this webinar for investing your time with us today. This has been fantastic. I do want to make sure to give a shout out for folks for our next webinar, which will be September 29th. We'll come right back here to these little box spaces and have an Energy Futures webinar on September 29th, noon to 1 p.m. Eastern, speaking to in-depth research that we've conducted at Groundswell on energy burden and energy poverty and the impacts of energy, climate change, and housing during COVID, how that has affected those who struggle to pay their energy bills, struggle to remain in housing, and where we see the trend lines going, where we see some potential relief, where we see some potential hazards, based on some in-depth research from Dr. Elvis Maleka here at Groundswell, our Director of Data and Research. But thank you today to our panelists, Ben Paulus, Greg Leventis. You guys are fantastic. Really appreciate your time and your good work in the field to help accelerate services for our community solar neighbors. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. We'll see you all next time.